Yes, I chopped off all my hair and only left these dangling ones because I'm a crust punk. Oh yeah. No, I put it up because it's fucking hot out. That's gonna increase in heat later on. I don't know. Today's particularly actually kind of cool, so it's kind of nice. I was a little afraid of coming out today because I was like, if it's as hot as yesterday, I don't want to go out there. This video, I'm gonna be answering someone's question on, because I mentioned in one of my videos, I don't really remember which one of the earlier ones, I mentioned that uh, gender neutral parenting is bad. Well, first of all, we need to define what that is. So, I did my research on this, and from what I can gather, there's two different types of meaning, or there's two different types of gender neutral parenting, and one of them, I don't know how actually popular it is, but one of them is parents force the opposite sex toy slash activity onto their child, like they force, for instance, their son into uh, wearing dresses and tutus and other typically girly things, and then they also fear that their daughter is into, like, pink, and not pink, like, what is typical for them to enjoy. And like, these gender neutral parents are like, oh my god, what do I do? We should be enforcing that girl to play in mud and stuff. So that's definition number one. And definition number two is a lot more tame, in my opinion. Parents do not enforce gender stereotyping on their child and allow their kid to express themselves however they want. No gender roles outlined. No encouragement to be interested in their gender toys, like girls interested in dolls. And gender is considered equal. And both both of them, I've pulled similarities in which uh, like, ultimately they seem to remove girlhood from girls and boyhood from boys. And they also, uh, I mean, it's not strict between both of them, but it seems often like they remove, uh, pronouns, and they want to encourage, like, they, them, and stuff. And even boy and girl, and just calling their baby just baby. So those are the two definitions that I've found. Oh, now it's time for my opinion. Oh boy. Because opinions can be shut down, I know that. Shut down and criticized, so I'm a little scared. Okay, so my opinion is that I can agree with not forcing your child into doing something that isn't them. Like, I really do think it's wrong to impose strict gender stereotyping on your child. Like, if, I don't know, if your son is like, going, ooh, dolls, I want to play with dolls, you don't go, how dare you, that's for a girl, how dare you. You're like, no, I don't think you should do that. Obviously, likewise for girls, if they're like, ooh, I want to play in mud or something, you don't go, smack, smack, how dare you. That's for boys. Like, we shouldn't be doing that, obviously. Also, not hitting our kids. But you know what I'm saying? Like, that we shouldn't be strict with the gender stereotype. But also, on the converse of that, or the opposite end of it, we also shouldn't be in like, oh, my girl's into princesses and she wants to be a princess. Smack, smack, We shouldn't be doing that either, obviously. We shouldn't be, you know, enforcing such horrible strict things to our kids, and I think most of us can agree with that. I am against gender neutral parenting in the sense that parents are removing gender markers from the equation altogether. When I mention gender is equal, I mean this is kind of a topic in and of itself, but I'll briefly state that gender is not equal and it can't be equal. It can only have equity. And I say that because boys with boy brains, male brains, will have their own good qualities to bring to the table, and then girls have their own qualities to bring to the table. And these things should be honored. And equality implies cutting out those differences and then making it just all the same. So, yeah, like that kind of gender neutral upbringing is, I'm adjusting, is not good, in my opinion. I feel weird reading off my script, to be honest, but I typed it pretty well, in my opinion, in my own, if I do say so myself. But that's what I'm doing. I'm against blurring the lines between what makes a girl and what makes a boy, because that goes against biological fact, which contributes to confusion later in life, which I'll get to in a moment. But I am for encouraging girls to be into girl activities because I'm against the erasure, if that's how you pronounce it. I don't actually know. I probably should have checked. But of femininity. So that goes with that second definition I said, like, or actually both of them, where, girls being discouraged to being into, no, that goes with the first one, to be discouraged against going into girl activities. So, uh, because for some reason, a lot of us are trending on, being like, girls should be interested in boy stuff, yada yada. Anyway, I don't see any value in having girls being into super masculine things. What's the point of that? I thought the whole point of feminism was to be like, let's celebrate femininity, but I guess that's not the case anymore. And it hasn't been for a really long time. And then for boys, I am for encouraging boys to be interested in boy activities because I am against the softening of men. And I know that one's like, ooh, that made my whole body pucker up in a bad way. There's nothing wrong with a feminine girl and masculine boy, which is me countering the first definition. And so I thought about what my definition would be for gender neutral upbringing, or parenting, but it's probably not technically gender neutral. I think it's just kind of common sense parenting, I guess that's what I would actually call it. But some people also might get offended about that, because how is that common sense if not everybody is commonly thinking it? But anyway, my definition of gender neutral parenting would be to not allow strict punishing gendered stereotypes at all in either direction, allowing the child to investigate their interests on their own, but gently encourage and enforce them to do, girl activities if they're a girl and boy activities if they're a boy. And I say this because children need direction and a goal to achieve as they age, and gender plays a part in that. I know that's a lot to take in already, but I'm going to get into it. In the video that I mentioned gender neutral parenting, and I said it was not a good or positive thing for me, I need to address now in this video that I was raised gender neutral, and there because I had that kind of upbringing, there was no standard for masculinity and femininity, and because there was no standard and there was no like foundation for me, I grew up hating femininity because I wasn't properly exposed to it. I never saw the positive side of femininity, because there was no feminine role model for me at home. Uh, so because of that, it made it very easy to just reject it completely, hate it, and stuff it in a box, throw it into the river. No, wait, stuff it in a box, beat it with a bat with a bunch of nails through it, and then throw it into the river and pee in it. Like that's what I symbolically did that. And I took interest in boy things because that's what my brothers did, and I wanted to emulate what they were doing. If my brothers weren't doing it, I wasn't doing it. And if they dislike something, I dislike something. Which, an example I can think of off the top of my head, it's not really gendered, but it'd be like, if they hated anime, for instance, I don't particularly like it now, but if they hated anime, my friends at the time were into it. But if they hated it, then I'd be like, maybe I shouldn't like it as much as I was before. Or like at one point I was starting to learn like the Russian language, and my brother was like, making fun of the Russian language. We were teenagers, and it was just like, oh, maybe I shouldn't learn. Maybe I shouldn't learn Russian, man, because he knows best. And as I've said before, like my mom also wasn't exactly the beacon of femininity, and she wasn't exactly like the best role model for embracing femininity. She wasn't exactly feminine herself. My mom seeing my behavior, uh, like she did, well, it's not, she didn't do it just to me, but she also did it to my brothers, where if I took interest in a boy activity, she'd be like, oh, okay, yeah, that's what you're doing, that's fine, whatever, and go ahead, do that. And then if my brothers looked into a girl activity, and then she'd be like, okay, that's what you're doing. And I know that sounds like a cool mom thing to do, but, looking back at it all, I'm like, it's kind of a lazy parenting thing to do. But anyways, I might get into that. I haven't specifically written down laziness, but, if she were listening right now, she'd say, oh, well, you were so stubborn, and there was no possible way I could have made you interested in girly things. But I started thinking more about that, and I was like, yeah, okay, I was a stubborn kid. But just because a kid is stubborn doesn't mean that, like, this is what they know. This is exactly what they need and what they want. But in any case, the example that I have, it's not related to gender or anything, but it's, relating to my stubbornness as a kid. And so, for example, I, among other children, obviously, like, I hated going to the dentist, and I pulled out every excuse that I possibly could to not go to the dentist. And I remember my dentist being like, oh, you need braces because all your teeth are fucked up, and you got your jaw like weird and stuff. And even though they said this, I don't remember how young I was, but I was young enough to not really understand the consequences of having nasty, horrible teeth. But anyway, I needed them, and I know that now. But at the time, I was just like, oh, it gives me so much pain, and I want to avoid that. So, I was stubbornly against being in pain, which makes sense, right? And because I just railed so hard against it, my mom was like, okay, all right, we're not going to get you braces, even though I needed them. I'm not going to force you into stuff. I'm not going to force you into getting braces against your own will, even though I'll force you to go to the hairdresser. That's really my point, is that even when you're a really stubborn kid, it's like you don't know what's best for you. And I know I needed braces by the time I don't really remember, middle school, high school, around there. I was like starting to understand, like, wait a second, these are really ugly. And and then I started becoming more insecure about it, and I wouldn't really smile all that often because of that. I want to compare this to dog training, because it is very similar. You're training your dog or your child, whoever, to like you're taking their best interest at heart, but you're also doing their needs in their future, and this is what they're going to experience. When you have an untrained dog, the dog is going to cause chaos in your house, and they're just going to do whatever they want. They're going to lead you, especially if they're a big dog, and they're, you know, they're going to tear up your house. They're just going to yank on the leash and basically be walking you. And a lot of people tend to not like it when their dog does that. So, and I like that dog does need a leader. It needs somebody to say, here's the structure, this is what we got to do. And when you don't train a dog to be used to certain stimulus and other like everyday things that happen in a civilized human society, that dog is going to grow afraid and anxious and bark at everything and bite people, including you. So then you can compare this very clearly to kids, where if you don't train that kid to have that structure, like I said, then they're also going to be afraid, and they're not going to bark, but they're going to, they're going to yell and scream and have tantrums and stuff. So we do want to have some kind of structure. And obviously it's not just gender, it's, you have to do other things. But basically my point is, a kid doesn't know what they want. And just because they might be saying, oh, I'm a princess today. Like, you can't just say like, oh, well, they're into being a princess, so therefore my son's a girl, or whatever. Because kids are based purely on whims and fluctuating feelings and logic, not logic, facts, or critical thought. Kids lack a strong identity. They follow whatever suits their fancy, and like whatever their siblings are doing, whatever their parents kind of set up for them to do, and and then what their friends do in the future when they get more socialized and stuff. And I say here as a kind of like a metaphor, simile. uh, put a put a blue person in with a group of orange people, and that blue person will eventually turn orange themselves. Impressionable kids will do that. But anyway, I think I'm gonna like elaborate on that a little bit more. So moving on from that, I hate that I'm reading a script, honestly, but it keeps my thoughts in line. Some of my arguments come from this one Vice article that I was reading. I don't personally like Vice really at all. But I was looking, I was trying to do my research and I found this. I'll have it in the description below as a link. I guess it's becoming a little bit of a trend in Sweden. I don't know too much, but that's what this article is on. There was Swedish parents, namely the mother. Like, I've noticed that a lot of times the man really has nothing to contribute. He doesn't have a voice usually. Fathers have a say in the parenting too, but I guess that's not the point. They allowed their son to wear dresses if he wanted to, and in the article it says like basically if he couldn't wear girly things he'd get depressed, and they're like, I don't know if you've seen a depressed kid before. It's like heartbreaking, and yeah, obviously it is. I get that, and I feel for you, but yeah. And then when he would go to school, like, kids and even staff would just be like, hey, whoa, your kids shouldn't be coming to school looking like that. One of the kind of interesting things, I suppose, was, it's interesting, but it's like, uh, he was okay with being called he, him, and wasn't partial to they, them, which I'm gonna talk about in a second as well. And so he knew he was a boy, which is great, I guess. My issues with this article is that, well, it's nice that these parents are allowing their child to be seen and heard. There's such a thing as going too far, to the point where you're basically the child's doormat. And in my script, I'm talking about the dog training. So, yeah, that ties in. Ooh. We as adults need to train children to be prepared for adulthood. And just allowing them to be whatever the hell they want does not apply structure, which is what, dogs and children need. Anyway, so furthermore, a kid's not going to understand what they them means. Oh, yeah, because I'm saying, like, this is my point. A kid is not going to understand they them. When you have a really young kid and they're not, like, of maybe roughly about middle school age, maybe, I don't really know exactly the details, but like, your kid's just playing around. I don't really know what gender really is at this point. So you shouldn't even be enforcing, like, oh, what's your pronoun, honey? And so also in the article, the mother was saying how not confused her child was, and that was proof to her that gender neutral rearing is totally okay. And then my refute on that is, your kid was like under 10 years old. I mean, for me, I wasn't totally aware of gender ultimately. Like, it didn't start making me feel uncomfortable until I reached about like late middle school to freshman year of high school. And I mean, it's going to vary differently from person to person, but I think this is kind of an important point to mention. Um, like I was saying with like the age when the kid starts socializing is in school and stuff. Like, not just preschool, but, kindergarten and whatnot. When he goes to school, he sees other kids, like, let's say it's a boy seeing other boys, they're gonna be like, they're gonna be confused because it's just like, oh, well, at home, I, I'm a, I'm a princess, or I wear tutus at home, yada yada yada. I like growing out my hair or whatever. And then the other boys aren't doing that. Obviously, well, I think it's obvious at least. Those other boys are gonna be like, but we don't do these things, and then we don't have anything in common because, you know, I like playing with trucks and Power Rangers or whatever, or whatever is hip these days. And that other we don't play with tutus and all this stuff, so that boy is gonna be like, is gonna be left with two choices, which is number one, either he changes his interests and becomes more into these boy activities, traditionally boy activities, or he's gonna continue being, into the feminine stuff, and which will lead to isolation, loneliness, depression, anxiety, and all those other wonderful, colorful things that human beings can experience. It's like that boy who's into those tutus and stuff can't exactly go to a girl because, especially if he has a male brain, especially, he's not gonna be accepted in the girl community because his way of asserting himself and expressing himself isn't exactly like a girl's. So these girls are gonna be like, what? No, shoo shoo, get out of here. And so, not always the case. I'm sure there's some anecdote of somebody saying like, oh, well, actually, good for you, but this is like, generally speaking, this is what we generally see. I bring up that example because it's what happened to me. Um, like, I did make female friends, but because of my gender neutral upbringing, there was this, there was like this invisible wall between me and the other girls, because it was like they weren't interested in video games or climbing trees or exploring or whatever else boyish activity I was into. That wasn't them, and so and I couldn't be with boys because they're gonna be like, oh well, girls are boring or whatever. You're not a part of our group. Get out of here, kind of thing. So I wasn't accepted in really either party. I mean, not to the point where I was completely isolated, which I believe is something that can definitely happen. It's a definite possibility. But while I did have some friends, I just felt like we couldn't really connect very well, and we didn't really share the same interests. And because of that, I'm pretty sure that's why I wasn't invited to parties that much. And so when I was writing my script on this too, I was examining like my childhood and like what was going on. What are the answers? What's the answers to my questions from back then? And and I can totally see, like I said before, like I can see why I got really depressed and anxious because I wasn't confident in myself, and there was nobody to back me up because I didn't really have any friends to back me up. And when you have more friends and a good, solid family background too, it's like you tend to be more courageous and stuff. But because I didn't have either of those things, I would just, you know, I could burst open the door and, pull up my sword, and be like, I'm gonna do this. Yeah, and my friends that I did make were unstable. Like, uh, not necessarily that they would come and go, but it would be like I couldn't find a stable, like hanging out. Like there's other kids that'll be like, oh, this is my childhood friend, and we would visit each other all the time. I wouldn't get that. I wouldn't be able to visit a friend that often. And there was also like um, being friends and then falling out, being friends again and then falling out. That kind of instability. We didn't have much of anything in common. But I hung out with them anyway because I lack social skills and confidence to make new and better ones. I just kind of settled with these people. Because I was raised gender neutral, I spent my entire childhood and teenage years confused, lonely, extremely depressed, anxious, and kind of mentally crippled. I feel like listing that off just sounds so clinical, but it's like, experiencing at the time was absolutely awful. I can't really channel those feelings and express them to a freaking camera. I only found direction when I met my current husband, who inspired me to fit into a more traditionally feminine role. He didn't do anything, I put it upon myself. When I looked into what really makes a woman, my life felt refreshed. My perspective on things totally changed. And I went from like confused, didn't really know what I was going for. Am I androgynous? I think I'll stick with androgyny. That sounds good. And, looking back at it, I was so angry and frustrated and depressed and blaming everybody, shooting everybody with a blame gun, you know. And that was not a way to live. And then, meeting my husband, it's just like, oh wow, I feel like I actually have a purpose in life, and that inspired me to, look up more of, what it means to be feminine. And I like this because I could actually reference something, which goes into what I was saying before with the whole history and widespread knowledge of gender roles and stuff. It was like finally something I could actually uh, pull references from and, do my own thing with it. So because of the widespread knowledge, history, and scientific studies on gender roles, it's far easier to reference our historical gender roles than these, whatever we're doing now. I don't know. I don't know if we can even label it. I guess we'd call it non-binary, androgynous, or something. Uh, we can find answers, structure, stability, and purpose in the history of gender roles. Gender-neutral upbringing and lack of gender roles creates confusion and lack of focus in life. That goes into, like, why do we want to make it even, like, why would we want to pile on uh, a struggle on top of what's already so hard with life? We should make these things a lot more easy. Whereas before I rejected it so much. It was like so beyond me. I didn't even want to look at it. And, you can't just live life completely rejecting something that's been around forever. Because there's always something to learn. And you don't have to go into that strict stereotyping, in order to like fit a mold. In my mind, you can mold it however you need to. Um, and this next little thing, goes into the second definition of gender neutral upbringing, is removing gender roles altogether and burning down the establishment. In my opinion, is very regressive, and with the current political climate, with like, burning down like everything, every like historical structure. Just a lot of things in history that now we're deeming are things that are wrong. I'm not going to go into detail, but it's like you can't destroy these things because then inevitably we're going to repeat the mistakes of those people. So we need to keep these things and create, like I said, like our own ideas of it and make a compromise and yada yada yada. Because as a society, we're always changing and molding into something different as we go along. And one idea we had 200 years ago is not going to be, it's not going to fit what we have now. So we do need to change it, but it can't be so radical that it's chopped out of the existence of humanity. That's not what we should be doing. And this is also a very important thing to note. I mentioned male brain, and there's also a female brain, and I know some people out there are like, no, there's no such thing, but there are scientific studies that show that there are differences. And just kind of an off note, but I think that some people are afraid of sex brains because there's this book I'm reading. It's called like Gender Antiquity, uh, and in the beginning of it, in the first chapter thing, it goes on about how like in history, like Plato and uh, those philosophers and stuff who looked into gender, they were seeing that, oh well, women are born inferior and then men are superior and stuff like that, and then people, I can see them being like, okay, well, let's say that both genders are equal, so then therefore women are not seen as weak, and therefore they can have more opportunity and uh, privileges of working in the workforce and stuff like that. But I I can understand it back then, but now we can't. That's not the case anymore. Yeah, biologically, um, yes, you know, girls have girl brains, boys have boy brains, and sometimes those brains are mixed up too. And it could be in female brains in a male body, that kind of stuff. But um, because of the male and the female, the gendered brain, the sex brain, they act in certain ways, and then also with testosterone as well, genetics and all that good stuff. Like that also contributes to our gender expression, and to believe that we're all, just homogenous gray blobs that do the same thing is just admitting that you're ignorant, in my opinion, because it's just not the case. Uh, and I think with the study of these sex brains, it will make it easier for people to understand what gender they are. Because if a trans person can go in and get, like, what is it called, CAT scan or whatever, they can get one of those and just be like, oh, there it is. It's expensive, I know, but it's like, there's your proof. And if we can reference science on it, then there's gonna be a little bit less confusion out in the world, which is what I want to see. I want to see less confusion. Anyway, so, getting to the end of what I'm trying to say is my solution to, or my view on common sense parenting, that's what I'm calling it, uh, is to, like I said before, enforce gender roles, but not strictly, allow enough wiggle room for the child to be able to express themselves. And I said, just because we enforce gender roles does not mean that girls have to be meek and incapable and boys to be unemotional and overly aggressive. We can teach our girls to be strong and courageous, but that doesn't have to compromise their femininity. In the process, we can teach boys to be held accountable for their misdeeds. You know what I mean by misdeeds. They do something stupid, and then people will be like, boys will be boys. And it's like, no, hold them accountable. And manage their aggression without compromising his strength and toughness. Like, I am so certain that we can find a compromise with this. We don't have to go to one extreme or the other. So what I'm saying is, we don't need girls to be extremely girly and boys to be extremely manly, or girls to be extremely manly and girls and boys being extremely girly. Like, we don't need to go to these extremes, and I don't really see why we're going for these extremes. So, my conclusion, finally, with gender neutral parenting, I believe that gender neutral parenting is dangerous. Ooh, I said a bold word. Especially with our society's growing obsession with being transgender and subsequently the expansion of detransitioning, which I see so many people being coming out as detransitioners, so it's really not as rare as some people seem to want it to be. So we need to arm our children with correct and solid ideas of gender so that in the future they can make an informed decision. In other words, whether they are transgender or not, like when they're a teenager or an adult. Not really when they're a kid. I want to see less confusion and detransitioning and more definitive answers. Blurring the lines between male and female means more confusion for transgender people as well as cisgendered people. So this does apply to both people, both sets of people. But that all being said, I also don't want gender to be that important for kids and teens because gender really shouldn't matter that much. It matters, but not that much. Reading a script like that made me feel a little bit uncomfortable, but I hope it gets the point across. So in the description below, I'm going to have links to the stuff I was looking at and researching and stuff. Most of it is against gender neutral parenting, but some of them are like kind of a little bit more neutral, but I can kind of tell they're leaning toward pro gender neutral parenting. And yeah, so I'm gonna have that down there so people can make conclusions on their own. Like, this is just my conclusion, and people are gonna obviously disagree with it, and that's fine. But it's just my opinion, and obviously we can we can discuss and make a some kind of compromise on it. But this is just what I've come up with. So I would like to see a little bit of discussion. But anyway, I do have one little update. I might not be able to make a video on time for next week, because I'm camping, and I might be like super drained from it, and I won't really have enough time to outline the video, so it's either gonna be like really late next week or the week after. So yeah, I'll try to be answering another question, but I also still want to do my own things. But yeah, anyway, that's my video. I'm just going. Anyway, yeah, so I hope this, at least some of it, was enlightening. Goodbye.